So welcome everybody to another review as read. Today we talk about Daemon's Curse by Dan Abnett and Mike Lee from the Black Library. Now Daemon's Curse is the first story in the series of Malus Darkblade, a character made famous from Games Workshop in the Warhammer Fantasy line. Now Malus debuted in Warhammer Monthly as a comic strip and became famous enough that he got a series of novels which begins with this one. So Daemon's Curse is the story of how Malus starts on this journey to fulfill his so-called destiny. But of course he doesn't know that. It begins with him being outside the sphere of influence. He is the son of the Volkhar of Hargrave, which is one of the major cities for the Dark Elves. And the Volkhar is like a warlord or a general under the Drakau being the person who rules that city under Malekith, the king of the Dark Elves. Now Malus was born from a concubine, so to speak, a Dark Elf witch, and thus that is why he's outside the sphere of influence, and also the reason his father hates him, because it was a condition that she would use her powers to help the Volkhar, only if she got a son from him. So being outside the sphere of influence, Malus does not really seek his approval more than want to take over, and this story is about how he starts and goes about that process, trying to play the Volkhar's children against each other because of the politics of the Dark Elves. And in the end, he finds out about this Chaos artifact, which he goes out to find, which contains a demon. And no spoilers in this whole review, so basically that's what this story is about. So we'll go through as normal, we'll go through the cons, the pros, and a conclusion. So let's get into it. Now the first con of the book is that the fight scenes, which are at best a series of he dodges, he slashes, he almost gets hit, and he hits but then kills the enemy. And that is not bad, it's just that the fights always seem to play out in the exact same way, except maybe in different patterns. And the most important thing is that it happens, I feel, a bit too often. So it feels too repetitive. And also, the fights themselves are a bit cliche, as very much when you're reading it, you kind of can predict what's going to happen. Therefore, there's little, drama to the whole fight. But in all fairness to the book, it might be because I know the story of Malus Darkblade to a certain extent, but to me, as I read it and I thought about it, it still felt repetitive and predictable. And from the fights, in fact, it leads to the biggest con of the book, I feel, which is Deus Ex Machina, which is miracle moments. Now, no spoilers, but Malus basically survives or avoids things that can almost feel really jarring. And again, the problem is sometimes it feels it happens a bit too often. You know, like traveling in a far-off place away from civilization, and somehow he manages to take wounds which would cripple or even cause a man to die from infection and everything, and he somehow survives all of that. Or either somehow his armor, he's still able to use it, even though there is no blacksmith inside, and he can still use it till the end of his story. I say this now that I like the book. The story is good, but nothing out of the ordinary. And thus from there, let's talk about the main pros of the book. Now, the first pro are the characters. They are multifaceted. For example, Malus, he is not the strongest, not the smartest, and he shows it by his many doubts he has whenever he gets into a situation of which most of he puts himself in. And also many characters also show many character flaws. Backstabbing highborns of the Dark Elves show is this utter self-confidence in themselves to a level where it reaches pride and how they feel that they are manipulating others when they are being manipulated themselves, and leads to each person getting into horrible situations. Unlike with other books where you get a very famous character which is undeniably untrickable or above everybody else and so on. And from there you can also see how the book also allows you a glimpse into the Dark Elf world of Warhammer Fantasy before the Age of Sigmar. Especially among the life and nobility, this book is actually really helpful because it shows how the different levels, like example I told you about Malekith the King, to the Drakau, to Volkhar. It gets you to look into that whole series of hierarchy and politics of Dark Elves. So if you're a fan of Warhammer, or even just fantasy in general, it's really cool. Now the other cool thing about the book is that one of the flaws of the book is actually the Deus Ex Machina moments. And that's kind of solved when Za'akan, the Daemon, is added to the book. Although he adds other questions that can crop up, he kind of fixes those Deus Ex Machina moments when he enters the story, because you can always argue that maybe he had a hand to play with it, and in the Warhammer world, the Daemons, they live not in time but out of time and within time at the same time. It's confusing, but it helps make sense of certain things. Unfortunately though, he comes nearer to the end of the book, and the best part about Daemon's Curse, I feel, is the feeling that you get reading this book, like as if you're watching someone get beat up. as throughout Malus's journey in Daemon's Curse, Malus takes injury after injury and gets himself into bad situation after bad situation, being tortured and beat up and so on. And it's described in many a detail because how good the writing is. It makes you feel when they say, like, example, he was stabbed and then he broke an arm and so on and so forth. Like, sometimes it even makes you cringe at what he's going through. And lastly, for a book with an obvious follow-up, it does not have a stupid ending that sequel baits at the cost of the story of the book itself, meaning that if you really wanted to, you could read this book by itself and you'll be fine. To put it the most clear, it's like the Magic the Gathering novels where all the stories are connected, but if you just stopped at one book, it wouldn't be that bad. You still feel that there was some conclusion to the story. So in conclusion, this is a good book. It is still entertaining, it's great characters, but still flawed. That being said, I still recommend the book, especially if you are a Dark Elf fan for Warhammer Fantasy. And on top of that, it has a whole series that's now ended, so you can get the whole story of Malus Darkblade, which is actually not a bad character. I never was a fan of him, strangely, when he was a graphic novel comic strip, but after reading these books, I actually wanted to know more about him. So, well done to Daemon's Curse. Subscribe, comment, let me know what you think. Thank you very much. Till next word.